Hello everyone and welcome to this LinkedIn Live seminar providing an insight into mobile telco security. My name's Martin Beecham and I'm the Senior Security Analyst at GSMA. We're going to run for about 30 minutes today. We'll have not much time for questions, but if you have any, please feel free to pop them in the comments and we'll aim to get back to you. So let's start. If we look at mobile services, they're being enhanced through increased deployment of 5G infrastructure, connecting to new industry verticals, and supporting a shift towards more flexible working. Changes in the geopolitical dynamics mean that mobile infrastructure is subject to greater security risks arising from malicious interventions in supply chains and direct physical and electronic attacks on infrastructure. Given this backdrop, mobile network operators are safeguarding the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of communications across the network by securing the critical assets, hardware, software, data, etc., and by preventing unauthorized access and intrusion into any of the constituent nodes or links. The lens for providing this insight into mobile telco security is through summarizing some of the key content from GSMA's 2023 Mobile Telco Security Landscape document. You can see the front page on the screen. This landscape document is published each year and focused on the evidenced security threats observed during the previous year. The 2023 Mobile Telco Security Landscape report focuses on 10 key security threats, which I'll cover in a moment. You can kind of group those into three security themes that I've shown there. So infiltration, for example, someone trying to obtain unauthorized system or data access. Access exploitation, for example, using that unauthorized access to perform some further exploitation, such as account access, lateral movement, or privilege escalation. Finally, availability compromise, for example, some form of denial of service attack. 2022 saw the continuation of many previously observed security threats, and this report therefore covers several topics that were included in previous reports, such as malware, ransomware, and supply chains. Additionally, however, this edition includes some threats not recently covered and with more emphasis, such as the human threat, critical and national infrastructure attacks, and spyware. Each section contains examples of the threat to provide their evidence and additional information that explains the threat and the response. On screen here, you'll see a QR code from which to access the security landscape report, and I'll repeat that at the end of the presentation. So please feel free, download the report and read for more detail. Why have we produced the report? There are a number of other excellent cybersecurity threat landscapes available, and some are referenced in the report. GSMA's report focuses on mobile telco security perspectives, not surprisingly. However, as we'll see in a minute, because mobile networks comprise both operational technology, network technology, and enabling information technology, there's a wider applicability of the threats to many other sectors. Each industry sector's operational technology will have specific security threats and vulnerabilities, but many are common across other industry sectors. The associated enabling information technology will definitely experience very similar threats. So by understanding the mobile sector security threat, this also informs other industries on their own security posture and likely exposure. Of the top 10 in the security landscape report, some threats are specific to the mobile network, but many are more widely applicable. And I wonder, for your top 10, would you have picked a very similar set, or are there some differences that you would view important? Security is very much a team sport, and the more the telco industry can implement company and industry security controls, the more resilient networks will be. As mobile telco, particularly 5G, adds more value to industry verticals, then this mutual protection adds another dimension. And that's the end game: mutual security resilience delivered across consumer mobile services and industry verticals. For mobile telco, the attack surface is complex, broad, and, as you'd expect, highly interconnected. And we'll take a look at that next. This diagram shows a simplified version of a mobile operator and the associated network attack surface that should be considered when understanding the security threat position. It's simplified. So in reality, of course, it's vital to understand the totality of the operational attack surface. And for mobile networks, in the top middle of this diagram is the operational mobile network. At the bottom, the enabling information technology. Of course, the operational mobile network contains a significant amount of 3GPP defined 2G, the original GSM infrastructure, the workhorse for much voice and SMS traffic. Also includes 3G, 4G, and increasingly, of course, 5G radio access networks and cores. Mobile network air interfaces use different encryption and authentication agreements, top left there, to connect to customers. The operational technology is actually underpinned by a range of connectivity, software-defined networks, IP networks, virtual private networks. There's some older technology in there, MPLS, multi-protocol label switching infrastructure, and time division multiplex connectivity, TDM. To the right there, interconnect is achieved through signaling systems, including signaling system number 7, 4G signaling diameter, and for 5G, the introduction of the security edge protection proxy, SEP infrastructure. That's not as simple as it looks either, because, again, connectivity there is supported through IP exchanges, IPXs, direct TLS interconnect for enabling that interconnect. Corporate systems provide a range of supporting systems, such as operational support systems, business support systems, corporate services such as customer relationship management, and office automation solutions, much like any other company. Remote employee connectivity is achieved through the VPNs, as the bottom left-hand corner, and workspace solutions are used in that space as well, such as Citrix. Private and public hybrid cloud solutions underpin much of the service delivery. So these systems have often evolved over many years to include both legacy and current systems, and those state-of-the-art newer systems too. So mobile networks are typically large-scale, complex, interconnected systems, and that's the attack surface that we're considering here. Okay, let's move on. These are the 10 security threats. So the report focuses on the threats that GSMA tracked through 2022, both from public sources of information and, importantly, from within GSMA's own membership. It's been important to present some of those membership intelligence to reflect the real-world insight whilst preserving some of the precise sources and techniques. I'll cover a few of these in more detail. Excuse me. But for now, I'm going to go through these 10 on this slide. Let's start with malware. Malware is short for malicious software. It's a generic term for any computer program that's written with the intent of performing acts on a compute device, including mobile handsets, without the knowledge or permission of the owner or user of that device. We see examples such as destructive wiperware, adware, viruses, spyware, worms, Trojan horse software, and ransomware. And we'll take a closer look at both ransomware and software and spyware later. A new topic for this report is the more obvious reporting on attacks on critical national infrastructure, including physical infrastructure attacks. The ecosystem supporting the provision of roaming and interconnect services is large, diverse, and has complex interactions. Compromised interconnect services have the potential to expose customer data within signaling, user data traffic, and the intermediaries associated with interconnect and roaming. There's a range of actors involved in this space, obviously mobile network operators and virtual network operators, but also transit carriers, GRX, IPX providers, firewall management providers, roaming hub, roaming value-added service providers, and messaging aggregators. Traditionally, the internet traffic between mobile operators relied on the underlying signaling protocols for effective and secure operation, and an inherent trust model that assumed that only those entities that needed signaling access actually had it. And for many years, this assumption has not been correct, and operators recognize that attacks can come through their signaling networks and their connections to other operators and partners. The industry's presented and developed a range of enablers to respond to this threat, including the use of signaling firewalls, message filtering and blocking capabilities, security cooperation across the industry, and really importantly, intelligence best practice sharing. However, signaling and interconnect remains an important and ongoing threat area. Moving across again, and in the light of serious geopolitical events last year, governments and national regulators are trying to increase the resiliency of network infrastructure by placing requirements on all operators to increase the levels of security and security controls. This can include new supply chain arrangements to manage the operator's use of specific suppliers. A recurring feature is to require the active management of an operator's supply chain. And operators consider the depth of management and deep understanding of supply chains required to ensure they're resilient and diverse. Moving across again, and particularly with the implementation of 5G, the industry is seeing a migration towards virtualized cloud-based network elements and infrastructure. And because of that design difference, security considerations that were once solely the responsibility of the network equipment vendor can become more that of the mobile operator or systems integrator. And since the software is now able to run on a range of non-proprietary platforms, operators ensure that whatever combination of hardware and software they use, it stays secure. This includes ensuring that the software is up to date, is running an original and authentic hardware, and that has not been altered. Although cloud native networks bring a range of opportunities and benefits, including network slicing, network scalability, and greater flexibility and vendor choice, they also introduce a range of potential security threats. If we move across again, smishing. Smishing is phishing via SMS, so short message service text. And the aim there is to try and trick users with messages that appear to be legitimate. Such alerts coming, for example, from banks, and the aim being to affect account access by overcoming first and second factor security authentication. And we'll look at that more later. SIM swap is a legitimate service offered by mobile operators to allow customers to replace their existing SIM with a new one. And SIM swap, can be required by a range of circumstances. For example, the SIM is lost or stolen or damaged. A different size, physical form factor SIM is needed for a new device, or the customer is porting out their number to a different network. A very specific mobile threat is fraudulent SIM swap. And while the SIM swap, obviously, as I described, is necessary, it's also provided an opportunity for fraudsters to obtain and utilize a replacement SIM to gain access to users' financial and wider service accounts. Excuse me. Fraudsters seek to compromise two-factor authentication to provide, used typically by financial institutions, but many others, to provide safe and secure services to customers. Fraudulent SIM and eSIM swap seek to exploit weaknesses in the mechanisms that operators use to switch mobile numbers over to a new SIM card. Lastly, the human threat, which we'll take a look at in a minute. So I'm going to move on to look at a few of these specific, these 5 specific threats that are in the report. I've mentioned briefly beforehand, but we'll look at a deep dive on a few of these. The format of these slides, at the top is a description of the attack type. So in this case, ransomware. In the middle is a few examples taken from the security landscape report to evidence, to show that this is a real threat, it's not made up. And down the bottom of each slide is a sentence or two on what one might do about this security threat. So ransomware, much in the news across many industries, including mobile. A type of remote malware-enabled cybercrime where the attackers initiates a successful compromise of a target system and then seeks to extort some ransom payment in return for restoring the data or not exposing or deleting the data. Much of that seen. And here are a couple of examples. Vodafone Portugal last year hit by a ransomware attack. One of the other interesting things we saw was the emergence of ransomware as a service. And the importance of this is it's simplifying the technical aspects of launching a ransomware attack, making it much more easy to achieve if you're looking to launch an attack. One of the interesting things there is obviously it can evidence and it can form the basis for a robust investment business case, leading to enhanced security controls and stronger defenses. Also, we see ransomware insurance has been used as a part of our risk transference strategy. Moving on, spyware, one of the new topics in the report. Form of malware designed to steal confidential data from a computer or device, used to access a range of personal information and other data to enable its author to gain unauthorized access to the services that those credentials are intended to protect. And on the right-hand side, we see some examples of the sort of data that spyware can extract if successfully launched. So those access credentials, username and passwords, PIN numbers, just gathering more information about their spyware target to enable social engineering attacks to be much more successful by gathering some of that wider intelligence that would make a social engineering attack more successful. Keyboard logging and location information or other information that may be extracted through spyware. And we see a number of examples from this last year, and I put one in here that from the Spanish government where they've seen both their Prime Minister and Defence Minister affected with Pegasus spyware. So thinking about the preventative measures, vulnerability remediation and patching by the original equipment manufacturers and operating systems vendors can counter a range of attack types, including spyware, smishing, which we've talked about briefly before, FluBot, much in the news previously, last year and years before, ransomware and other malware. From a network perspective, network operator perspective, close attention to signaling links, including particularly the deployment of signaling firewalls, correctly configured, of course, will help in the defense. Again, a new topic for this year, we put in the more significant reporting we've seen of both alleged and real cyber and physical attacks directly on critical national infrastructure, including telecom providers, a couple of examples we'll look at in a sec, and on cable and power infrastructure. So we cite a couple of examples here. Vodafone Portugal suffered a major cyber attack, led to the loss of its entire network for several hours, and also an attack reported by Slovak Telecom, a large-scale cyber attack. I guess the important thing there is, particularly for physical infrastructure compromises, there's a very lengthy mean time to repair. So think about time to repair for subsea cables, for cables underground, for tower infrastructure and antenna. They can take a long time to repair. So, you know, the consequence, the response, if you like, from network operators is resilient network design, ensuring there's adequate redundancy, and making it harder for a successful physical attack to be successful by, you know, having preemptive physical controls that make that harder to achieve. Smishing, I mentioned earlier, this phishing via SMS, and we cite a specific example here, and as I say, there's others in the report that I'd commend you take a look at. For this one, Trend Micro highlighted a mobile malware infection chain targeting both Android and iPhone devices, and the trigger is a smishing message. The interesting thing with this one was it appeared, the smishing attack appeared to come from a telecoms company rather than a bank or other company. So a change in the way that the targeting is presented. It's the same attack technique, a smishing attack underneath. But members of the criminal gang sent victims emails, text messages containing phishing links, as I say, very much like FluBot, which eventually led to a bogus banking site. Yeah, so the smishing examples above, the FluBot examples that we saw last year and particularly the year before, demonstrate the widespread and ongoing prevalence of this attack type. So network vigilance, consumer awareness, strengthened security defenses, all of those things act to enforce and strengthen controls against smishing attacks. Yeah, so human threats really quite interesting. So, you know, it becomes that much more important the better the security and technical controls become, then perhaps the weakest link becomes the human involvement. And we can see that taking several forms associated with the development of a security or fraud attack, you know, typically including social engineering. But we see mobile network operators, staff, often with extensive administration privileges on the operational network, are targeted to gain access to their credentials and move, within the network if that becomes successful. Tricking, bribing, extorting customer service agents into providing personal data, often to enable account changes such as a fraudulent SIM swap. We also see concerns around malicious insiders where they're abusing their existing privileges and accesses to provide systems access or exfiltrate data. So access control, privilege control, least privilege controls against that sort of problem. We also see human error, human threat, if you like, through misconfiguration, where a system is left in an insecure default state. An example there in the middle, where we've seen a threat actor trying to get access to a corporate virtual private network. We also saw this newer technique called prompt bombing, where the attacker triggers an authentication request repeatedly in the hope that the target will just authorize the message to make it go away. So a range of security controls can be established: staff vetting, additional administration, education of staff, and as I say, privilege, least privilege, and access control limitation are controls that we might look at in that space. So those are the 10 topics that are in the report. There's also a number of case studies which we looked at to provide a little bit more detail in a number of those areas. We look to give an international perspective on some of those case studies as well. So there's some interesting information from a New Zealand perspective. We take a deep dive on spyware, FluBot, the international conflicts that we've seen in the last year. And again, we see a little bit more detail on social engineering scams. This slide's really to convey how GSMA thinks about helping its membership strengthen security resilience and build mobile resilience into the infrastructure. There's a range of services that we point out there, notably the telecoms ISAC for sharing intelligence information. I mentioned that earlier, sharing in a secure way. We look at coordinated vulnerability disclosure schemes, security assurance schemes, SAS for UICC and SIM card production, and there's also a service around network equipment security assurance scheme, NESAS. A range of working groups and best practice that GSMA provide to its members. In summary, I identified those 3 themes that I mentioned earlier: infiltration, access exploitation, and availability compromise. Our top 10 that we saw last year, and we could evidence last year those attack types, and a little bit here about how we think about building the response to those threats with GSMA services. So back to that QR code. If you want to download the report, here's the QR code. There's the link down the bottom if you need it explicitly. Download, get engaged, get in touch with us, and help implement that team sport I talked about. Finally, a little shameless plug for GSMA's Mobile 360 event coming up. Mobile Security and Industries, a link on the left-hand side there, and GSMA's LinkedIn presence on the right-hand side, the security showcase. So feel free to get in touch, give some messages, and yeah, that's great. Thanks very much.